Garp versus Akainu has been a very heavily debated topic with very heavily contested takes on both sides of the matter. And this has been going on for almost a decade and a half, since the time of Marineford actually. And my own takes on the matter have evolved through the years, through various discussions, through, debates with people on Twitter, YouTube, in real life. And just to be clear, we're talking about old Garp at Marineford versus Akainu at Marineford, when Garp said he was going to kill Sakazuki if Sengoku didn't keep holding his head down. And the way I see things right now, I don't think this is a close fight. I think this matchup in particular goes overwhelmingly to Akainu, and I'll explain why in full detail. But I will say, there are some things that have happened in recent chapters, in recent arcs, and in recent years that have made me think about it even more. Even though I think Akainu wins, I do think Oda has presented things in a way where it's understandable to think that Garp, as old as he is, as slowed down as he might be, I understand why some people may think he would still come out on top in this matchup. That's because Oda has shown a very great bias towards the old generation, or the older people in the series. And he's talked about it and said that he likes to show old people being strong. He doesn't like to show them, feeble, weak, defenseless and everything. He even had a 72-year-old man labeled the world's strongest, and that was Whitebeard, who was far past his prime. So this would make you think that the old generation was just on another tier entirely, that they can maintain enough power in old age to surpass every living person in the current era. So then it starts to feel like it's just simple math. If old Whitebeard, who's the world's strongest man, can be the world's strongest man at 72, why wouldn't someone who went toe-to-toe with him in his prime, why wouldn't they be able to contest for this title? Especially because this man, Garp in particular, is fully healthy, no sickness. Only thing he's dealing with is old age. And that makes complete sense, right? But that is not at all the full story. There's so many things going into this that have to be taken into account before we can make the proper assessment. Number one, was Whitebeard truly the world's strongest man at the time of Marineford? I don't think so. I don't think so at all. I think you can even debate he wasn't even top 10 at the time. But that's not what the One Piece world thought. The One Piece world thought this man didn't lose a single ounce of strength going into his 70s. They thought that he was still at peak fighting power. They didn't know what old age could do to a man as mighty as Whitebeard, and they didn't know that he was sick either. Like I've said before, for this old generation in the One Piece world, they were carried by reputation when they were at this age in their life. Just look at Rayleigh versus Blackbeard in one of the more recent chapters. Blackbeard did not think this was an easy fight at all. He may have even thought he would lose. He had no idea how much Ray had fallen off. But Ray knew he would lose this matchup unquestionably. And then going back to the Whitebeard topic, Whitebeard isn't someone who should be held to the same exact standards as Garp. And that's not because they're not within the same general tier of power, but Whitebeard has a devil fruit that would allow him to destroy the world. And this is the very same devil fruit that has Sengoku thinking, we're not guaranteed a victory here. We might lose ourselves. But let's say the shoe was on the other foot. Let's say it was Garp that pulled up to Marineford with nothing but his fists. I don't think he'd be allotted the same respect, and that's not on the basis of power, more so it's a basis of versatility. And that's the versatility that's granted to Whitebeard by the Gura no Mi. So given those few things, I don't think Whitebeard at all should be used as the baseline to determine who wins between old Garp and Akainu at Marineford. But then there's another side of it. It's the fact that old age does play a part. There are consequences to getting old in One Piece. Number one, of course, is reduced power, and that's not something we'd be able to measure outright or be able to tell that, things are slowed down for them in terms of power output. We can't look at an attack and say, oh, this attack is 10 times weaker than it would have been in their prime, because we have no real idea what the upper limits of their prime power is. But we do have things like Garp at the end of Eni's lobby saying himself that the speed that he can throw cannonballs at has been reduced as a result of old age. So on one hand, the physical power has come down, but then on the other hand, there's also the stamina issue. Look at Rayleigh versus Kizaru with Saba Ori. Kizaru hadn't even broken a sweat yet, but Rayleigh was ready to tap out after a short exchange. In his prime, this would not have been an issue. In his prime, he may have been able to go on for days. In fact, we do have an example of him fighting for 3 days with the Roger Pirates against the Whitebeard Pirates. So you can imagine this was a very regular thing when he was at his peak. But now let's look at what Akainu has to offer, because it's not just Garp being old, it's the fact that Akainu is extremely powerful in his own right. The most glaring thing is the fact that Akainu at Marineford was an admiral, and the admirals were considered the Navy's greatest power. So let's not forget, Garp, even though he was a vice admiral, he was still a part of the Navy. He wasn't this exception to all rules. So all 3 of the admirals, being in their prime at that time, were stronger than Garp. And I think the thing in the community that people tend to hark on that holds Akainu back in terms of how they perceive him is his fight against Whitebeard. And in the anime especially, it looked bad for Akainu. It looked like he was getting manhandled, tossed around, you know, just a defenseless little boy that couldn't do anything against this old and senile Whitebeard. But I don't like to use the anime in this example or this debate because it's just completely disingenuous to what actually happened in the manga. In the manga, as we know, Whitebeard pretty much got a free hit on Akainu, but even then, he wasn't out for the count. He came back and kept fighting afterwards. That's after taking a Gura punch to the skull, to the ribs. You know, he endured all of this and still came back for more. You have to think about it. If he can withstand an earthquake to the face, an island splitting earthquake to the face, why wouldn't he be able to withstand some punches from Garp? But going back on the matter of endurance, you see, old Rayleigh was ready to tap out after a short stint clashing with Kizaru. Akainu, on the other hand, was able to go a full 10 days against another admiral, an admiral in their prime, going at full power. And he came out of that matchup and won. And the biggest thing I think people don't take away from this is the fact that although Akainu went 10 days with Aokiji, that does not tell us the limits of his endurance. All we could take away from this fight is 10 days was Aokiji's limit. But was it Akainu's? We have no real idea. Maybe he could have gone 15, maybe even 20. Who knows, honestly. But it's that sort of endurance that would guarantee him a victory against an old Garp at Marineford. And yet still, it's not just the ability to withstand hits and take hits for an extended period of time. It's also his offensive ability, because Akainu has the most destructive devil fruit in the series, according to his Viva card. So much so that it's not crazy to think that if he gets one clean hit on Garp, Garp might lose a head, just like Whitebeard. Now, although Whitebeard was slower because of the sickness and everything, you know, maybe it may take longer. Maybe it would be harder for him to land that hit. But it's still possible. If he lands that one hit, he could take Garp's head clean off. That's just how crazy the power of the Magu Magu no Mi is. The very last thing I want to touch on, though, is the matter of Conqueror's Haki. As we saw last chapter, Garp is confirmed a Conqueror's Haki user. Not just that, an awakened conqueror, someone who can quote their attacks in Conqueror's Haki. And of course, I 1000% subscribe to the idea that Haki surpasses all. Just like Kaido said, Haki above everything. So surely that makes a good argument for Garp, right? I don't think it's that simple. I think one thing is the fact that Garp, although he's still an awakened conqueror, it's not something that's guaranteeing him a victory against top tiers, because the glaring issue of old age still looms. And it's something like the fact that Yamato is an awakened conqueror, but that doesn't mean her Conqueror's Haki can defeat someone like Green Bull or something like that. Even if Green Bull isn't a conqueror, his fighting ability is still well above Yamato's. And I'm not saying he's definitively not a conqueror, but I'm saying if we're to assume he is not one. And to be honest, I'm not sure what to think, because I feel like in the One Piece world, some top tiers do have to exist that are not conquerors, because Kaido said only a handful of the very strongest can quote their attacks in Conqueror's Haki. So I think this would mean that among the very strongest, there are some that can quote their attacks in Conqueror's Haki. That doesn't mean the very strongest are only Conqueror's Haki users. But within this group of the very strongest are people that can quote their attacks with this haki. In any case, I think the two most important things for being an awakened conqueror and having an advantage over a non-awakened conqueror, you have to both be in your prime and be experienced with it. If one of those two things isn't there, you might lose to a non-conqueror. But then let's think about, what if Akainu has Conqueror's Haki? That just makes the matchup even more decisive in his favor. And if you ask me, I think he definitely has it. I think there's more than enough precedence there. The first thing is the fact that he's a fleet admiral and more than likely a future opponent of Luffy's. The former fleet admiral, which was Sengoku, he was a Conqueror's Haki user. So whether or not the other admirals have it, I think Akainu having it is very close to certain, especially because of what he's shown us within the series. Everything he's gone through, he's exhibited so much traits that just, you know, they just scream the will of a conqueror. More than almost any antagonist we've seen in the series. And there's still so much more to come from him. And this is why I think that Akainu versus Old Garp at Marineford is one-sided in Akainu's favor. But tell me what you think though. Tell me, do you think Garp or Akainu wins at Marineford? Comment all your thoughts down below, but also don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell for more videos like this.